Hey, my name's Adam from Toronto, Ontario, and I subscribe to the Creative Control Patreon because I feel that at the end of the day, there are very few people in the industry who are able to consistently get the kind of quality interviews out of very diverse subjects of many creative stripes and disciplines, as Vish does pretty well on every episode of the podcast. It's a no-brainer to me that I want to support this when you factor that in to all of the bonus content you get on Patreon, and it's a listener-supported podcast, so I want to keep the great content coming. So that's why you should also support Creative Control on Patreon.
To make your flexible monthly donation to Creative Control, please visit patreon.com/Creative Control today.
LAL is an electronic music duo consisting of Rose and Nick, who are based in Toronto, Ontario. Community conscious and empowering in their music, Rose and Nick's latest album as LAL is called Dark Beings and was released in May of 2019 by Coax Records. At the 2019 edition of Sappyfest in Sackville, New Brunswick, Rose and Nick made time to speak with me about the origins of their personal and professional relationship, how LAL got started, the significance of campus and community radio on their music making, the inspiration behind Dark Beings, and much more. A part of the E1 Podcast Network with the support of listeners like you who subscribe to this podcast and spread the word about it, and make flexible monthly donations at patreon.com/Creative Control, plus in-kind support from CFRU 93.3 FM, Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, and Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton. This is the 508th episode of Creative Control, featuring the bold and ambitious LAL, with your host, me, Vish Khanna. Hi, LAL.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good.
It's nice to be in New Brunswick.
We are in beautiful, sunny Sackville, New Brunswick for Sappyfest.
Totally.
And this is your first time in Sackville.
First time, yeah.
What do you make of it?
It's cool. We've been here.
Love it so far.
We've been here like an hour. Haven't seen any puffins though.
Are you expecting to see puffins?
Yeah, I was waiting for the puffins. That's
I
what
don't
I
know if
was
there's
waiting
puffins
for.
here, but it's really nice to be outside the city.
At the table we're sitting at, I was having lunch earlier, and a giant hawk was flying around us. I was worried about my children, frankly. I don't know. Do hawks hunt just dead things? I don't think they do.
No, they hunt, but small things.
Right.
Maybe not a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
Pretty small.
That's
So for the people listening, I know who you are, but can you introduce yourselves one at a time? Why don't we start with you, Rose?
I'm Rosina Kazi, and I'm the lead singer of the electronic duo LAL.
Thank you.
I am Nicholas Murray, and I am the producer of the electronic duo LAL.
I love the fact that there's like police sirens behind us because we're also pretty protesty.
Yeah, you're militant. It's like they knew we were set up.
Yeah,
they're on
they're coming for
microphones.
us.
We got to get them. So how did you two come together exactly? Can you tell us that story? I don't really know it myself. Nick?
We worked in a record store in 90s Toronto. In the basement of a record store. It was called HMV. A lot of famous people worked there, or not famous, prominent people that went on to do really good things worked there as well. So we came up early Toronto electronic music, R&B, rap music history. I was also part of a production company called The Grassroots, which was we did a second wave Toronto hip hop record called Passage Through Time. That was pretty seminal in terms that it brought together a lot of what was happening in the city at that time.
We both worked in the dance department, and at that time
I was working on music with The Grassroots, making music for rappers, and Rosina
I just kind of followed
was
him around.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we were tapped into.
This
is pre-American sort of Drake
The
hip hop
second
being as huge
second
as it
wave
is
Toronto
now.
hip hop.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so you worked in a record store,
Yeah.
but then how did you get into making your own music, though? That's what I don't... You mentioned your own stuff.
Yeah.
Rose, how did you get into making music?
Well, I think because we were hanging out in a pretty heavy independent, like hip hop, R&B, electronic music, dance music scene. I just kind of like fell into the hip hop and R&B scene, loving hip hop and R&B, but like then coming to Toronto, working in the basement with Nick and a bunch of different people, really being exposed to the culture. So I did a lot of behind the scenes stuff first. Like I worked for record labels. I volunteered for everybody. I was doing all kinds of stuff. But I really wanted to sing. So I just kind of harassed Nick or would just show up and just follow him around. Eventually bought my own ASR 10 thinking that I would get...
ASR 10 is a keyboard sampler for those that don't know.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah.
Good context.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah, you got your own.
My father helped me pay for it because I'm Asian and I have access to funds sometimes at that time. Thinking that I would attract
Is that
all
true
these,
of all
like-
Asians?
No. But like
I
there
think
is
that's true of me, too. When I've needed money, I ask
was
my
a-
mom,
yeah.
not my dad. My
Yeah.
dad will say no.
No, my dad would say no too, but for some reason he said yes.
Okay, that's good. Follow
And then
your
I
dreams.
was thinking that I would have all these folks come over and make beats, which they did, but then I also started to make beats. But then after a while, I think Nick just got annoyed with me bugging him all the time, and he just was like, all right, let's do this. And we fell in love, so that...
So you met in Toronto. Are you in love? Are you
Oh, yeah,
partners
we've been
with-
partners for like
Okay.
25 years
Okay,
as well.
so
Yeah.
there's that aspect as well. Okay, so you met at this HMV, which was this giant megastore on Yonge Street in Toronto. Where are you actually from? Are you from Toronto? Were you born and raised
We're
in Toronto?
from
Brampton.
Suburb
West
of
Side.
Toronto.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about Brampton recently with Havaya Mighty.
Yeah, Brampton's putting out some really good talent. There's the Hawk.
There's the
Wow.
Hawk.
Yeah, there's...
Which is my middle name, which is also very telling.
That might be a bald eagle.
That looks like an eagle.
it like
actually.
an eagle?
Wow,
That's
look
an
at that
eagle.
Oh, that's
wingspan.
an eagle. Well,
Isn't
that's
this
also
amazing?
a good sign too,
So
though.
we live in Ontario. We don't even know. We never get to see these things.
What is that thing?
Suddenly, what is that thing with the wings?
Yeah.
Was that an ostrich? Anyway, that was amazing.
That was beautiful.
It ran away when we noticed it. Did you
Right.
notice that? It flew away. Anyway, sorry. You're Brampton.
Yes.
So you came up in Brampton. For those who don't know, Brampton is a suburb of Toronto, kind of near the airport. Lots of Indian restaurants, mostly Indian restaurants, I would say. What are cultures?
Well, when we grew up
Portuguese
there,
as well?
Yeah.
it was mostly white.
Big Italian
actually.
too, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it was mostly white.
It was mostly white. There was a big Punjabi community, a Caribbean community, but not like there is now.
Okay.
Now Brampton, Mississauga are very diverse. But when we grew up, it wasn't.
Oh.
But out of Brampton, you mentioned Hawaii Mighty, but there's Grassroots came out of Brampton, Ghetto Concept, Rexdale, so Rexdale, Brampton area.
Yeah.
There's a huge hip hop history of folks coming out of
Well,
the West End.
Interesting fact about Rosita, her generation, she went to a school called North Park. Her same class of when that all graduated at the same time is like Cassie Campbell, Director X,
Oh.
and
Yeah,
like,
we all went to high school
There's
together.
another person too that's like overachiever years.
Cassie Campbell was the
Hockey player.
Yeah. I
played ball with
X.
Cassie. Yeah.
X is
Yeah.
Yeah.
very famous film hip hop
Yeah.
director. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Brampton has a lot of really interesting.
Interesting.
And
Same
now
school,
you've got
same
people-
class, same year.
Okay.
But now you've got like
Strange.
people like who else is coming out? Like R Flex, Savannah Taylor, Blipter. Like there's some really good talent coming out of always has been out of Brampton and Rexdale.
Do you imagine this has something to do with kind of like diasporic stuff?
Yeah.
For sure.
So
For sure.
people, I
Yeah.
used to make a flippant joke because my friends would say, they'd ask me,
Yeah.
where's there good Indian food?
Right.
And I'd say, well, you got to go to, like, they're charging you $5 for one samosa here in Guelph. Go
Yeah,
to Brampton, Mississauga, to get like 10 for 50 cents or
Totally.
whatever. And I used to make this joke. I'm like, I don't know what it is. I feel like you come to Canada, you get out of the airport, you set up shop, like as close as possible. 'Cause why would all these amazing, like some of the best Indian restaurants, the best Indian restaurants in the country
Yeah.
are probably in that area.
Easily, yeah.
Totally.
So I think that is a joke, but I think it informs something else about why a city like that is producing the people you're talking about, particularly
Mhm.
people of color.
Mhm.
And I don't know, there's something about getting here and really needing to, your family, your parents in particular, I can't even imagine that. I'd never flown across the country to live in another place and have to set up something for myself on my own. So there's something about that kind of, let's call it DIY spirit of like, I'm going to take my family and take my future to this whole other place that I don't know and just try it.
Yeah.
So do you think that propels the spirit of people in Brampton, like some communities?
I mean, speaking from my own experience, I think there's a lot of like a lot of people wanting to live out their immigrant fantasies, and Brampton, I think, propels that idea. As so does Pickering, Oshawa, and like where you see a lot of Jamaican or like West Indian population. I feel like it's like people that were living in the inner city that then were able to acquire wealth to then move to the suburbs, and so Brampton is definitely like an example of that, a very big example of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I grew up in the Bangladeshi community. My father came in the 60s, my mother as well, and they basically started the first Bangladeshi association. So I grew up fully around DIY, DIT, do it together, Bangladeshi arts culture, like just theater, dance, music. Every weekend they jammed. You know, we're Muslim as well, so it's interesting when I hear about people have this one idea of being Muslim. They partied, and we're very artistic. So I just kind of continued that because they did it because, you know, they need to survive culturally and just spiritually, I think. So they would get together every weekend up until I was probably about 13.
Celebrate.
They'd make their own sets. I played in every high school in Toronto. And all over like Ontario, they would get together. And hours they would drive to hang out.
Yeah. So that makes a huge impression. Nick, did you have that in your family? Did you have like...
No, my brother is a musician though. He's Stephen Murray. He produces like more poppy experimental things. He's worked with like Chaos and like a bunch of other Sean Hewitt. He did that Sean Hewitt record back in the day. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah, he's just like a dude.
Okay, so you have some music in your family, but you guys found it yourself. It wasn't coming from your parents per se.
No.
Okay.
No.
So do you have, each of you, I'll ask you the same question one at a time, but do you have a sense, like we've talked a little bit about the HMV experience, a little bit about the Brampton thing, but do you have kind of any memory of what it was that made you think music was cool as a fan, and also what made it eventually seem accessible to you? I mean, we've kind of talked about some of that in the HMV days, but do you actually have a memory of like an early influence or inspiration, like something you heard or saw on TV where you're like, oh, music, what is this? Like, do you have that, Nick?
I do.
What do you have?
I think for me it was community radio. And I think it was like the Fantastic Voyage show. I'm aging myself now, but like the Fantastic Voyage show and like Ron Nelson, like DJ X, like, and the amount of focus that I had. At one point I was like, from 1 to 4 I was there all the time. And then like,
where is there?
In my basement, listening to the Fantastic Voyage show in Brampton. And
on what station was it?
88.1.
Right.
CKLN.
CKLN.
Yes. And like, I was so into it and so focused. And the fact that I was so focused on making tape mixes and practicing DJing at lunch, and like it was just, I just was in a world of my own, and that's kind of what I knew it was like.
That's exactly what happened to me. But
same thing.
But in grade 6, I got introduced to like 88.1 CKLN, also CIUT, and you know, Dave's dance music, Ron Nelson. More coming out of dance music than hip hop, but that also being part of the conversation, and then listening to everything because campus radio played everything.
Right.
Started buying records. Started coming downtown, buying records. You know, started also like cutting up tapes, and we'd record the shows and then cut them up and get rid of the talking.
Right.
So definitely in that same vein, and then getting the hell out of Brampton as soon as I could. To go to school, but then dropping out because I really want to make music. If you're weird and kind of a chubby, weirdo queer kid out of Brampton, even today, it's a difficult place to be. So that's where I needed to go to find something else, to find a different community.
So you big up Brampton, but you also realized that it was sort of holding you back.
Totally, and I don't know if it's probably myself that's that held myself back, but there wasn't enough stuff for young people, particularly if you were racialized, if you were strange, if you weren't automatically talented in a specific way, but you were passionate. There's a lot of emphasis on talent right away, and so I wasn't very good when I first started.
Right.
But I was passionate.
Right. You needed to
I know what I
develop.
want exactly. So I think that's why I got it.
This is an aside, but this is the exact opposite story of Havaya Mighty. When she was on the show, she talked about how she had a horrible experience in Toronto, her whole family, like the racism and bigotry they faced in Toronto and the prejudice at her school. Like she went from being treated as though her energy and intellect was of a remedial variety to they moved to Brampton and she was skipping grades, like accelerating through the coursework, like got the support.
I wonder what year she had moved to Brampton, though.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. She's younger than both of us, I would think, by quite a margin on some level. Probably in her 20s, I would think.
Yeah.
But that's fascinating, isn't it?
I think Brampton has a long history of dealing with newcomer immigrant population, though. I feel because the school that I went to Central Peel, which was like known as the rough school, only because it had like an ESL program. So I grew up amongst like immigrants all day, so English as a second language.
Yes.
So I think Brampton has a very, but you wouldn't notice it wouldn't appear in the government or the city councils though, or the people that run the Brampton.
I think now you can see it.
That
before
whack
you can,
dude. What's his name? Conservative dude. Anyways, the mayor of Brampton is Patrick Brown.
Oh yeah, Patrick Brown. Yeah.
Ooh. Anyways, but not to get into politics right away, but yeah, that guy.
Yeah. No, I'm not
very
I'm
representative of Brampton. And what
I think
is.
suburbs of big cities can be both a refuge and, like you say, like you need to kind of escape them every once in a while.
Well, it's because Toronto used to be, a lot of immigrants would start off in Toronto and then they'd find their way outside Toronto, you know? That's changing because of the gentrification of the downtown. But like, I think that's why I had this relationship back and forth, because my parents were always downtown, but then we would always be in the suburbs as well.
Right.
And I think being exposed to like downtown young, there was just something exciting about it. You know, it wasn't Brampton. You didn't have to have a car.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm gathering that everything we've talked about, almost everything we've talked about, kind of informs the aesthetic approach of LAL. The college radio, the eclecticism, I suppose, of campus and community radio, the communities you grew up in. I can feel that informing the way you guys approach music. Is that fair?
Yeah.
I would say so, yeah.
It's coming from your origin, really.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did LAL begin then? I'm trying to figure out if we talked about this already. I understand how you two met, but how did LAL, and you were saying you followed him around until he let you sing on some stuff. Is that it? Is that how it began?
And then we just kind of like hooked up as well, and then we fell in love, or whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
We created partnership.
Okay.
And then we just started making music.
You question hookup? Does that seem more like temporary or transient?
Well, I just don't want there to seem like there was ulterior motives involved. Like, like it wasn't like.
I mean, you totally could think that, except we've been
admitted
25 years.
She's already admitted she started following you around because you would let her sing on songs. I mean, there's clearly an ulterior motive to this relationship.
No, but not because like I didn't really want to get with him, but then I was like, oh my god, I love this person, and that was
sweet.
Was like, oh no.
It wasn't really like a. Yeah. Anyways, it is what it is, and that's all it is. Really,
then the first record that we made was called Corners. We basically just were living together. We were looping stuff up. On the ASR 10, I was just singing over stuff, and that record really came out on Public Transit Records.
Story before that though. When you met Kevin Moonstar. We met Moonstar, and Moonstar ran this record label called PTR, which was kind of like a paradigm shifting moment for me, because I was basically record sampler dude, and then Kevin Moon and Manohar got introduced to my life, and then I became like a bit bigger in my scope, because I was introduced to like synthesizers, like day one of me and Kevin Moon. Like he brought me into his little dorm room or his apartment where he had like an Octave Cat, which is a very serious synthesizer thing, and I was like, what is that? And then he just started playing with it, and then from there on it was just like opened up a door of like possibility in terms of music for me. But Kevin heard a tape recording of Rose singing through a headphone into her ASR 10
that I had produced.
Singing through a headphone?
Yeah, I was producing like really like lo-fi music at the time.
Okay.
That was a thing that people did when they didn't have mics. They would sing into headphones because it would it's like a microphone essentially.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
And then
He put the track out on a compilation called Code 416.
Yeah.
And then I think maybe that's what maybe got your interest, the fact that I was doing it on my own as well.
Do you know what possessed you to want to sing?
My mother sang with a harmonium every day. So I think that influence of just being around somebody who and just loving music.
What did she sing?
She sang old Bengali Tagore songs mostly, some folk songs, or some Kazi Nosru Islam, but every day.
Religious backgrounds for both of you?
No, not at all.
Not for you.
Well,
No.
I'm technically Muslim,
Sort of,
but I wasn't
but not
raised
so much.
religious.
Okay.
My father was like a socialist.
Okay. Okay. So, is your mother singing? That's it? There's no...
And being around the Bangladeshi, Bengali music culture.
Yeah.
But also, like, my friends, all of us just love music.
Okay.
We love music, so we just being around music. I was a big Janet Jackson fan when I was young.
There you go. That's kind of what I'm looking for. I was
Yeah,
looking for
that
someone
kinda-
like Janet for some
Yeah.
reason. I wonder.
I don't admit that often, but
Well, she was very significant.
for sure,
super
particularly for like
significant, yeah.
chubby people of color, women of color, queer kids, like whatever. Like
She was very
the only
underrated.
one. Totally underrated.
And I think because of that stupid Super Bowl thing, she's just...
but before that, like in America, she's like royalty. It's just we don't
Right.
necessarily get that feeling in Canada.
Right.
But like, yeah, I mean, like she was one of the first to come out and
Every
do big production.
single was like huge. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I've read and heard LAL described as a collective, though. I think of it as you two. Do you think of it as a collective on any level?
I
don't think of it as a collective. I
Well,
think
the
it's a duo.
reason-
But have you heard that? Like, I've read that online.
It was. I mean, I think in the spirit of community, I think we definitely have like other things that we do within community. But like the duo is just it's
It
just
is you two.
This
Well,
is
it's us two, but then we expanded out. We had 5 band members at one point, and then Ian D'Souza was the third member for a
okay.
long time. So there was 3 of us. But in terms of, we're not a collective in terms of like we work collectively. Like in terms
There it
of
is.
our art design to video work to conceptual work, we work with a bunch of different people. And the music is influenced by an entire community.
Okay.
So I think that's what people mean when they say collective. It's in that spirit. The main 2 people are Nick and I, but then we work with many different types of artists.
Do you know where that impulse to be community-minded in your work approach, and I think lyrically, as we'll get into the new record, Dark Beings, like that impulse to talk about community and to raise community, the spirit of communities up, it runs throughout the music I've heard you make over the years. Do you have a sense, either of you, of where that impulse comes from? Is it speaking from a need that you wish, like, or rather I don't know, something that you wish you had when you were younger, or does it speak to something that's contemporary only? I'm trying to get at that.
Yeah, I think it partially comes out of this idea of always being othered. So even growing up around the Bangladeshi community, and then for me being around the hip hop and R&B and the electronic independent community, before it became big in Canada, like we're always othered. And so in order to survive, in order to make stuff happen, we have to work collectively.
Right.
And I think indie rock has done that. So many different forms have done that.
Galvanize themselves.
Galvanize ourselves. And I just never was able, that's what I believe in, because we're still making pretty sort of music that's not necessarily part of the Canadian mainstream dialogue, which is fine.
It's outsider art.
It's outside, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So in order to survive and I think spiritually and just to maintain some level of like just sanity, I feel like I have to work with my community.
Right.
Some
sort of commiseration needs to occur, even if it's not articulated.
Totally.
Strength in numbers kind of thing as well?
Yeah.
Because even like events, parties, some of these events are packed. Like all around Canada, you'll have these amazing events that the mainstream Canadian society is not paying attention to.
Yeah.
And that still continues to happen.
Yeah.
And that's what I've always been a fan and inspired and attracted to that energy.
Right.
To the really the underground. I know people argue whether there is still one. I completely believe there is
People
one.
argue that there isn't an underground?
Some people think there isn't one, that everything's been co-opted or everything's been...
Well, there isn't an underground in terms of the sense of what underground means, like something that's not accessible to everybody. Now everything is accessible to everybody. There still is forms of underground music that are very, very super niche, but it's still kind of accessible based on the internet or like...
I guess
I
what
think
you're
it's just changed.
It's
It's
like
changed.
just in terms of like stuff that's online. I mean, I guess there's certain viral cultures that are not existent.
But I think what you're saying is, like, if either of us were involved in throwing a party or an event that featured all sorts of outsider or underground art, knowing the three of us, we would have there would be an inclusive bent to it.
Right.
Meaning, like, no one would feel like we were being snobby about it or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
all are welcome to experience this strange thing.
No elitism.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that's
yeah,
a very important part of underground culture,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and why so many people feel strength in it,
Right.
Mhm.
because they felt welcome,
Totally.
and they also like welcome to participate in it,
Right.
to make their
Yeah.
shit, or to just watch it.
I would say that the ethos of the underground culture still exists. I would say in some forms of music, more so in others. But in terms of like it actually being completely underground, like it was, I mean, this being somebody that grew up pre-internet and experienced like where there was a time when there was no rap music on the radio, like when it was just on campus radio.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So there seems to me, I hinted at this, there does seem to be a particular politically motivated intent within LAL. Where does that sort of stem from? It's kind of the same stuff we've been talking about, right? But it's a bit more outspoken
Well,
than
I
that.
think it's also, I think, a sense of disempowerment. Like, so much of what
Yeah.
we...
For you,
I'm talking about communities of color, racialized communities, queer and trans two-spirit
Okay.
communities being outside them, outside, within the margin, still being outside, you know? And so for me, it was very clear from the beginning how a white lens or it was white folks who dominated culture in Canada, or it was a class thing, you know? And it was really, we didn't see ourselves in positions of power, people who looked like us, people who, like, not just one or two people, but a group of people, you know?
Right.
So for me, it was really important to talk about, not just within music, but in education, in all across, you know, like the Canadian political system. Like, you're not seeing us reflected in numbers in a city like Toronto or Brampton.
Yeah.
So that just was very obvious to me growing up, and still is, you know. And so this very important for me to create a scene where also there's shared power, or the people in power also reflect who's actually the music is coming from, you know. And I think that's we've still got a lot of work to do, but we're seeing changes.
For me,
Okay.
it's a matter of actual survival and personal safety, and understanding that the political is personal. I mean, the representation of us in music industry, not necessarily my main goal in life is to
No, for
pursue
sure.
that. But I definitely think that, like, being influenced by like Public Enemy and stuff like that back in the day, understanding that like there's a form of expression that can live outside of just how much in love we are with each other, was really important for me. And I think my early like days as being a part of like a hip hop band, like specifically a hip hop duo, a group called Born to Roam, that was like our mandate was to kind of speak on issues that was like I'm the greatest rapper, or
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So, but
You wanted it to be purposeful.
I wanted things to be purposeful. I wanted it to have actual meaning, and not necessarily meaning for everybody, but like for the people creating it. And like it was about sharing expression, basically sharing or experience, or trying to create something out of this world that we're living in that's not necessarily what we're being sold.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So for those who know of LAL or listen to the new album Dark Beings, and maybe read some of the biographical info about it, it might be natural to assume that there's a division of labor here, that perhaps Nick, you're doing the music, Rose, you're doing the lyrics and the singing. Do those two roles, or those three roles, I don't know how many roles I just indicated there, but does that do you inform each other in terms of how that
totally.
works? Like, are you working on, again, is that right even? Is that distribution
Well, what usually
correct?
happens is we'll write together. I'll usually sit and wait for him to create something that I want to write to, and then I'll smoke a joint and I'll start to write, and I immediately write something pretty fast, and then we have a dialogue or a fight around what we want to add or what we don't want to add.
So I was sort of accurate there.
In
Yeah.
some ways, yeah.
But you have, like you were saying earlier, Rose, that you developed this ability to make beats and make
Yeah.
music. So are you equally saying, Nick, that was good, but why don't you move this around here, do something with this
Totally,
arrangement?
totally.
You'll do that. Do you have that comfort zone?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
And and I ended up doing a lot of the business, which also becomes like a very gendered thing. But now I'm like, I don't really want to do the business stuff as much. So now we're sharing that responsibility as well. And so, and I think we're coming back to a place where we're, I just don't want, I don't have the ability to sit at a computer for like 10 hours and edit. It's just not my strength.
Edit music.
Edit music.
Oh, okay.
And that's what he loves to do.
But you do have this background, you said earlier, of working with labels behind the scenes. So, in some level, that's why you took the reins initially. Of being
I think that really helped.
Yeah,
Yeah, working in like I was an independent buyer at HMV, a music buyer, being very involved with Honey Jam and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, Honey Jam, that's awesome.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
started off almost like A&Ring and being a part of the community.
Right.
And working for Tommy Boy, and then I hated it. I was like, what is this thing?
Why'd you hate it?
Because Tommy Boy at that point had gotten so big that the people like black folks and Latin folks who had started who the culture it's from were not in positions of power. Women were all secretaries. You know, it was all like white cis straight men at the top.
Right.
And when you have these dreams of working for Tommy Boy, then you get there and you're like, oh, this is nothing. Like, this is not what I had thought. It was a really good experience to go through because I realized that I actually want to make music.
Yeah, you do learn from those things for sure.
For sure.
Like, I mean, when people say that things like that build character, it's really about that experience
Yeah.
that you gain. You're on a label now, though, right?
We're on Coax, which is Ray Spoon's label out of Victoria.
Right.
But Ray Spoon...
Is Ray in Victoria now?
Yeah, Ray's in Victoria.
Ray's in
yeah.
Victoria.
But the way the...
Ray keeps bouncing around this country.
Yeah, totally. But their whole ethos is like, yo, like if we're not going to... When they came out as trans, the Canadian music scene sort of like shunned them. And they had to go and they created their own world.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and their whole thing
I mean, I
is
knew
like,
that they transitioned. I didn't know that.
And so
Well, they were a country singer before.
Yeah, they were doing country folk. They were
and
doing
country.
really well.
And then they made that record Superior, Inferior. That was like from country to like weirdo electro folky
Classic album.
Beautiful
amazing
album,
album.
yeah.
What an incredible album.
Yeah,
But
love
as soon
that
as
album.
but as soon as they came out as trans, they noticed and they transitioned much earlier, or they came out as trans way before the conversation was necessarily so public right now.
Right.
But they totally felt how they were being shunned, and so they just were like, let's just create our own world.
Right.
And they continued to do that.
Right.
And because their music is good and they're just prolific, books and films, and you can't deny what they're doing.
Right.
And so a bunch of us are on that label who have that attitude.
Do you collaborate with Ray in any way musically, or is
Not
it just,
yet.
I do some remixes for them. They sent me some stuff recently. They just sent me some of their newer stuff. Yeah.
new album out soon? Right.
Coming out.
Yeah.
There's a release
Yeah,
in September.
Right.
But they're building a studio, so we're hoping that one day we'll get a chance to go out there.
We have talked about collaborating at some point though.
I got to write to Ray.
Yeah.
Ray and
I mean,
I used to talk quite a bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Cool.
back like when earlier. Yeah, I
But
might
like
have been.
Quantum Tangle's on the label.
Right.
Like it's a bunch of bands who like were on the outskirts of the Canadian music industry.
Right.
And we just want to be a part of a label that gets us and respects who we are.
Nice. Okay. So let's talk about Dark Beings, which I think I hear some of our discussion points informing this record. Let's start with you. What do you want to say about this record in terms of its lyrical themes, maybe some of its intent? Rose, do you mind?
It really has to do with, it's kind of our last record was called Find Safety, which was based off our art space called Unit 2 and the people that come to that space and the safety that we're searching for. And then this record is about then what happens to that energy, the transcendence of that energy. So energetically, that's what this record is about. Lyrically, this record is about acknowledging racialized experiences, queer and trans, two-spirit experiences, but also those of us who are connected to the ground, the earth, the underground community. It is a call to about environmental issues because of what's happening. A lot of what I use as metaphor, I use nature as metaphor, but also to just to talk about the community that we're a part of. So
there are instances where when I'm listening to the record and I'm trying to figure out in a very probably simplistic way, rudimentary way, is this addressing people who are marginalized? Is it as much addressing the people who are marginalizing them, like the marginalizers? Because I feel like there's messaging on some level for both. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay.
I think you're right.
Do you know? So that has kind of an instructive aspect to it on some level. Look at what you're doing to these people, and this is their real life experience. Do you know what was going on there in terms of that?
A lot of that is kind of us looking at the devaluing of indigenous and old knowledge. At the same time, understanding that we were playing with the term ancient futurism or future ancients, so that things change and can be informed by the past.
Right.
And that's a wonderful thing. Technology can be something that's amazing. So I think a lot of this record was about that, really talking in this country, indigenous voices and communities and the land itself just being completely treated like shit.
Yeah.
And that's something that I cannot ignore, particularly because I also have a pretty big two-spirit and indigenous arts and friends.
Right.
And if we don't start to do that healing work, we're kind of all lost. And I think that's everywhere. These are the folks who are caretakers of the land, who know the land. And we have to have a conversation. And when we have folks in Canada who don't even have access to clean drinking water.
Yeah.
People think Canada's this great, wonderful place. And for many of us as immigrants especially, we've left war-torn countries or shitty in histories to come to this magic land. But then we're unaware of how this land also has been treated horribly, and also the people who have taken care of it. And I think that's something that we have to heal and shift.
So you're expressing that here.
Definitely on Dark Beings, yeah.
Nick, do you want to talk a little bit about the evolution of LAL musically and what you're hearing and seeing on this record?
Well, I guess first we started just looping up random French records and singing over them. That was the thing. And the more obscure, or Herbie Hancock or whatever it was, and then we kind of worked with bands and then drummers and stuff and track drums and stuff, and then went that traditional route. And then we went more to a confined duo of just 3 people or 4 people maybe, and then we just went back to the 2 of us. And I feel now we're still at the 2 of us, and we're kind of really able to kind of find space in the ideas that we're bringing, and the electronic thing is more than just a substitute for a band. It's more of a playground where we can kind of or a palette where we can express ourselves, which is really beautiful. And I think this record really kind of exemplifies that. It really brings it to the surface of all the skills that we've built from when we first started till now. But it began really simply. It was just me with one kind of synthesizer thing and consistently just kind of creating kind of motifs or loops and Rose kind of singing over them and creating ideas around that. But I mean, I'm a drum and bass kind of guy in terms of that kind of has to be solidified before I can kind of even move on to something. So that's kind of where I start.
You need the foundation.
Yeah.
Right.
Not necessarily the style of music, but more so the instrumentation.
Rose earlier had mentioned a number of emerging artists from Brampton, which to me indicates someone who's paying attention to what's going on. How active are you as a music listener, Nick? Because I know I've talked to people, including myself sometimes, I don't necessarily consume the same stuff I make, kind of stuff I make, because I don't want it to necessarily influence what I'm doing or cloud what I'm doing or make me self-conscious about what I'm doing, frankly. which is, I think, both good and bad. I mean, you learn from others, obviously.
Yeah.
But are you an active? Would you consider yourself an active music fan?
I think I'm definitely like informed by like a lot of stuff that has come out during my like 20s and stuff. But like in terms of like, I'm very informed by like viral culture. I listen to a lot of records. I listen to a lot of like old records from like the 70s and 60s, and like that's kind of like all the information that I take in about like how traditional music should sound. But in terms of like modern day cultural stuff, like, do I listen to Drake? Yeah, I listen to Drake when he releases a new record. I just listened to the new record that he released on Friday, compilation or whatever. And then I listen to what's going on in hip hop mostly. I listen to a lot of house and techno.
Okay, so you do actively listen, and it might show up
mostly
sometime.
SoundCloudy, but like that's as far. Now I have Apple Music, but I don't necessarily like. I'm not. There's definitely more people that are like, well, you should start doing this thing, and this person's really doing the cool thing. You should start doing the thing that this person's doing.
Right.
Like, I mean, sure, I was influenced by Arca when they first came out, and like, I'm definitely into like the idea of the paradigm shifters, like the people that release music where you're like, okay, the world is a different place now because you've just introduced certain ideas. I guess
also we run like a music venue.
Yeah.
So what's your music venue called?
Unit 2.
Right.
So we have so many amazing DJs and acts that come through. That's how I'm influenced. It's just like by watching. I can no longer listen to recorded music unless people play it for me because I'm just overwhelmed. But live music, like there's so much opportunity to see amazing live music in Toronto for cheap as well.
Right.
And just having a venue just lets you like really see some amazing stuff that you from inside and outside the country.
Well, it does feel like your music is informed by something contemporary, whether it's the lyrics. Like I feel like it's a very present sound.
Right. I think if there was to be a stronger influence, it would be more spaces, like certain small clubs that I've played in, like the sound of that room and what people were. If there was to be like something where like it would, or like in different countries, or like remembering what worked in that space, or remembering what the vibe of that space was, and being in that space and understanding that, being inspired to create something for that.
And we pulled in Jim Anderson on this album because we didn't want to fight as hard as we usually do.
Jim mixed the record?
He mixed and then also gave us some insight on songs that he thought that we should go forward with.
Oh, kind of produced it a little bit.
A little bit, just to get, because we were just like, we don't want to fight. We have a timeline. Can you just listen to some stuff and give us some feedback?
Okay.
Yeah,
so
and then mixed it.
Is that the first time you've had an external collaborator?
Yeah, and it was great. I mean, like...
You might do it again? It sounds like you might do it again.
I think we need someone out. I think we need outside.
Yeah.
I think it's really good to have that.
I think so, especially for like the decisions of what needs to appear on the record, which is not the easiest thing to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sequencing, all these sorts of things are...
You can get lost in like 9-minute versions, and it's like, well, we don't need to do that, which is great sometimes, but we don't need to do it every time.
Well, it's a cool record. I mean, I think, what did it end up being? 8 songs or something like that? Yeah, so it's great. I think it's great. What's next for LAL? What are you going to do? Are you already working on new songs?
We're working on a
house music project,
house music techno project.
Not necessarily a techno. I mean, there's a minimalistic. It's kind of like a minimal kind of deep housey thing. It isn't necessarily a techno thing.
We have a side project already that does well in Europe, and we just never have followed through with it. So we're
What's it called?
Myrrh featuring Rosina.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah. Right. So we're like, let's actually see what happens if we try doing it.
Yeah.
And then LAL, my dream is to take us somehow in a caravan for 6 months from Yellowknife to Brazil with a group of other artists and really connect with Indigenous and folks who are connected to in the environment, because we're losing it really fast.
Oh my God, yeah.
So I want to be able to see it, experience it, and then work with a bunch of people, gain insight to make not just a record, but like an entire project around what we've learned.
Wow. Okay.
That's my dream.
But is that going to come to fruition?
I hope so.
Are you working on that?
I'm trying.
Okay.
Well, but we haven't tried. The conceptual ideas are beginning to the dream states there. And
always so ambitious. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, usually doesn't end up being the things that I first initially dream of, but somehow that spirit still exists within the project. So.
It's great. No, it's great. Where can people who are listening go to learn more about LAL in the on the internet, where would you send them?
www.lalforest.com.
LALforest.com is the hub. Are you on? And you're on all the things.
Instagram is LAL Forest. Facebook, I think, is LAL Forest.
LAL World.
LAL World.
Why LAL Forest?
Red Forest, and LAL means red in many South Asian sort of languages.
Yes, that's what I associated with.
Yeah. I think because I'm kind of a hippie in some ways, in the sense that I love mushrooms. I love outside raves and dance parties and forests and water. And I just find the forest a very calming place.
Okay.
I was definitely attracted to the name because of the meaning of red and its intensity. I was definitely into the idea of intensity.
Okay. All right. Well, is there a song from Dark Beings that we can play for people right now? If so, do you want to pick one?
One of my favorites, which we don't really perform all that much, is "Losing Myself," only because it's dealing with like the idea of addiction and what it takes. And when I was making that, it was really kind of like speaking to my own existence in where I live, because I live in a warehouse in a like very industrial part of town. And so it was very informed by being in that space and my living quarters. So I feel it's like us, like completely actualized in terms of being a part of our surroundings and creating an expressive form of that and talking about us, what we've been going through and seeing in our community and in the world, basically, and people dealing with addiction issues and dealing with
but
mental
also
health.
that this idea that like addiction is a bad thing. So many people we know and love and who are brilliant are folks who've had past addictions or are struggling with addiction,
right.
and mental health. So it's a song that really tries to embrace those of us who are dealing with these things, including ourselves, and not to shun us or not to shame us. That's not my favorite song. I actually don't like that song. My favorite song, I think, is like the one with Jaheda, which your brother did. Sorry.
Stay Right.
Stay Right. which is a Bengali MC from Manchester is on there.
Are we having a debate about what song we're going to right now?
You can pick.
We usually have somebody else come in and
This is
talk.
why we brought a producer.
Well, I'm compelled. I appreciate that you're not maybe the biggest fan of it, but I'm compelled by the story of Losing Myself.
Yeah, the story is very important.
People can obviously
and
check
the video
out.
is beautiful.
Okay, so people can check out. There's a video for it, for crying out loud. Obviously, some thought went into this.
Yeah.
The album is Dark Beings. People can check out all the songs wherever it's on all the things, I assume,
Yeah,
right?
it's on the things, yeah.
But shout out to like Cyrus Marcus Ware, who did the visual work, Raven Davis out of Halifax, who was on the conceptual team, Jose Garcia, who also was on the conceptual team, Noel Nanton, Typotherapy. We have our own font on this record. We have a really powerful team of people. Jesse, who did all the printing of the shirts and stuff from Just Seeds, and they're brilliant folks if you need someone to print up t-shirts and stuff in Toronto. Really strong group. Alejandra Iguera just did a new video that we're releasing soon. But there's a whole community behind what we do. So
we go back to maybe being a collective more than we said earlier. This is Losing Myself from Dark Beings. This is Losing Myself by LAL. Rose, Nick, thank you so much for making time for me and for this conversation, and best of luck with everything going forward.
Thank you.
Cool.
Left me broken and open to the earth, wind and fire move. I'm forgetting why we left it, always that same feeling. Rage has led me astray, fight inside of me, never going away. Never going away. I wanna feel when I am losing myself. I wanna live when I am losing myself. I wanna feel what I am losing sometimes battling fate. I wanna feel what I am losing. I am losing myself. I wanna feel what I am losing. I am losing myself. I wanna feel what I am losing. I am losing myself. I will become, I will become, I will become, I will. We will be loved, we will be loved, we will be loved. I will become, I will become, I will become, I will. We will be loved, we will be loved, we will be loved.
Very special thanks to Nick and Rose of LAL for being on this, the 508th episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network and available on all iOS and Android platforms, and also on just about everything else that there is. Spotify, YouTube, Audio Boom. You can find the show on those things. If you can't find a particular episode that you're looking for on any of those platforms, or if you want to learn more about me and sign up for my semi-regularly scheduled newsletter, please visit my website, vishkhanna.com. You can like Creative Control on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at vishcreative or at vishkhanna. That's me directly. You can also listen to a radio show version of Creative Control on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time around the world at CFRU.ca or on an actual radio at 93.3 FM if you're in or near Guelph. Also, please visit patreon.com/Creative Control to make a flexible monthly donation to keep this podcast going. We have tiers now. A $6 tier, $6 and above, gives you access to exclusive content on our Patreon page. So go to patreon.com/Creative Control and donate to the show today. Thanks, as always, to Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf, Planet Bean Coffee, Grandad's Donuts, and CFRU for their in-kind support for this show. Thanks, as always, to Jim Guthrie for letting me use music of his on this show. You can learn more about Jim at jimguthrie.org. And finally, thank you. Thank you very much for listening to this episode with LAL, and maybe checking out other episodes of the show if you like what you've heard. There are many. As I mentioned moments ago, 508 episodes. There's got to be something behind this episode that you want to check out. It's got to be something. So please, have a gander, have a listen, and subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends about it. That's all I can say. And that's all I'm going to say. I have to go. Bye for now.